Crestview Heights was a city built on glass and ambition. It was a place where towering skyscrapers kissed the clouds, home to the wealthiest people in the world, including Jonathan Hale, the brilliant founder of Hale Tech Industries. But beneath the glittering surface of Jonathan's mansion, there was a deep shadow. It had been a year since the terrible accident that changed everything. Jonathan's daughter, Emily, a bright, imaginative 10-year-old, was mostly confined to her wheelchair. She could barely move, and worst of all, she hadn't spoken a single word since the day of the accident. She was like a beautiful, silent statue. Jonathan, a man who could build empires with a word, felt utterly helpless. He poured millions into her care, but nothing worked. At night, he would patrol the silent, marble halls of his mansion like a restless ghost, unable to sleep. One cool, late evening, around 2 a.m., Jonathan froze in the upstairs hallway. He heard it. Music. A soft, low humming, almost like a lullaby coming from Emily's room. This was impossible. The mansion had 24-hour surveillance, high-tech motion detectors, and a team of 10 stern, unblinking security guards led by the terrifyingly strict Mr. Pennyweather. Jonathan's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed the heavy carved oak door to Emily's room and threw it open. What he saw stopped him cold. Standing in the moonlight streaming through Emily's huge window was a man. He was tall, thin, and looked like he had been living outside forever. His hair was a wild mess, his beard untrimmed, and his clothes were patched with dust and rainwater. He was a homeless man, and he was dancing. He twirled and swayed slowly, clumsily, but with a surprising lightness. He hummed the soft, silly tune, holding the moonlight in his hands as he danced for the silent girl in the bed. And Emily, the motionless child who hadn't smiled in a year, was laughing. It wasn't just a small chuckle. It was a clear, joyful sound that echoed with all the light that had been missing from the house. She couldn't move her arms, but her head was tilted back, and her eyes were shining like stars. The moment lasted only a second before the chaos began. Jonathan shouted, and the guards, who had been miraculously asleep, poured into the room. They quickly subdued the intruder, pinning him roughly to the floor. Jonathan, shaking with a mix of fury and confusion, demanded answers. The homeless man didn't fight. He just lay there, smiling up at the panicked billionaire. He smelled faintly of rain, dust, and wild-grown flowers. "How did you get past my security, Pennyweather?" Jonathan barked, turning to the bewildered head of security. Mr. Pennyweather, a man who rarely showed emotion, stammered, "Sir, the sensors, they registered nothing. The whole system glitched at 1:58 a.m. We thought it was a power surge." Jonathan knelt down, furious, glaring at the man they called Red because of the faded crimson scarf he wore. "Tell me," Jonathan demanded, "how did you get in here? My house is a fortress." Red, his eyes strangely gentle, looked straight at Jonathan. "I didn't break in, sir. She invited me." "My daughter cannot walk or speak," Jonathan roared. Red's smile didn't waver, but she can feel, and she needed music that reminded her of the sea. Jonathan wanted to throw him in the city jail and forget the whole impossible event, but something in Red's eyes stopped him. They weren't the eyes of a criminal. They were the eyes of someone carrying a heavy, sad burden. The next morning was chaos. The guards were interrogated, the security system was torn apart, and Mr. Pennyweather looked like he might actually cry from the shame of the breach. Jonathan was exhausted, pacing his office when the phone rang. It was Emily's physical therapist, Mrs. Gina. Her voice was high-pitched and breathless. "Sir, get down here. Something incredible has happened." Jonathan rushed down to Emily's therapy room. Mrs. Gina was weeping with shock and joy. "What is it? Did she speak?" Jonathan demanded. "No, sir, but look." Mrs. Gina pointed to Emily's leg, resting gently on the mat. Emily's foot, which had been perfectly motionless for an entire year, gave a tiny, almost impossible twitch. "It's small but medically impossible," Mrs. Gina whispered, wiping her eyes. "Nothing has worked for months. We've used every therapy known to science, and nothing." Jonathan stared at the foot. That tiny movement was a spark of hope, a miracle triggered by a homeless man who smelled of dust and danced in the dark. Jonathan couldn't ignore it. Could one night of laughter and a strange, silly dance achieve what millions in high-tech treatment couldn't? He had to see Red again. Red wasn't a criminal. He was the key to his daughter's recovery. Jonathan had the man held in a private guest house on the property, refusing to hand him over to the police just yet. But before Jonathan could talk to Red, the city caught up to the story. The doorbell rang, and Mr. Pennyweather ushered in a severe-looking woman with a sharp suit and a detective's badge, Detective Maria Kessler. Maria was known as the toughest, fairest detective in Crestview Heights. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Hale," Maria said, her eyes scanning the expensive room, "I'm looking for a man named Red. Real name, Raymond Dawson." Jonathan tensed, suddenly worried. "He's a trespasser. He's being detained." Maria's face hardened. "He's more than a trespasser, sir. Raymond Dawson escaped from the state psychiatric hospital last month." Jonathan felt a cold, sharp dread. "A psychiatric patient broke into my house? Is he violent?" "Not violent," Maria said, looking deeply into Jonathan's eyes. "He was locked up 7 years ago for murder, specifically a fatal fire in a downtown Crestview apartment building." The room went completely silent. Jonathan felt dizzy. Red, the man whose eyes were full of sad burdens? A killer? Jonathan replayed the image of Red dancing and Emily laughing. It felt utterly impossible, but the detective wasn't finished. She lowered her voice, becoming intensely serious. "He swore he didn't do it, Mr. Hale. He was found wandering the streets that night. He was easy to frame. Ray claimed the real killer wore a Hale Tech jacket." Jonathan froze. The air left his lungs. 7 years ago, Hale Tech was embroiled in a massive scandal. A prototype malfunction was alleged to have caused a fire that took a woman's life in the downtown area. The company paid huge amounts of money to make the investigation go away, protect their patents, and keep the shareholders calm. Raymond Dawson had been the easy scapegoat, homeless, mentally unstable, with no defense. Jonathan felt his blood run cold. He hadn't known Ray personally, but he had funded the entire cover-up that put him away. The truth, the terrible crime he thought he had buried, was clawing its way back to the surface, ushered in by the impossible twitch of his daughter's foot. The elegant guest house, usually reserved for visiting CEOs, felt tense and cramped. Jonathan Hale sat across from Red, Raymond Dawson, who was guarded but calm. "Tell me the truth, Red," Jonathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you kill the woman in that fire 7 years ago?" Red closed his gentle eyes, a look of deep, ancient pain crossing his face. "No, sir, I didn't kill her. I tried to save her." He opened his eyes and they looked hauntingly familiar, like they held the reflection of a painful memory. "That woman, her name was Martha Dawson. She was my sister." Jonathan felt a punch of sickening realization. He hadn't just covered up a corporate crime. He had helped frame a man for the death of his own family member. Red's voice was barely a whisper. "Martha and I lived in that apartment. I was outside that night, trying to make enough money for food. When the fire started, I ran back in. The smoke was too thick. The heat was too much. I couldn't reach her." He continued, his voice trembling with the effort of remembering. "I was screaming. When the police found me, I was covered in soot, yelling that the Hale Tech device blew up. The core was faulty." He looked Jonathan right in the eye. "But your company's investigators showed up fast. They said I was hysterical, that I was lying to cover up my own drug use. They said my sister never even existed. They drugged me in that psychiatric ward until I didn't know my own name." Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clutching the arms of the chair. "And the dancing, Red? Why were you dancing for Emily?" Red smiled, a genuine, sad smile. "That's the strange part, Mr. Hale. Before the fire, Martha and I were always broke, but we were happy. Every Sunday morning, we'd listen to old records and dance in our tiny apartment. It was silly, clumsy, joyful dancing." He tapped his head. "The drugs took my memories, but when your daughter Emily laughed, that sound was exactly like Martha's. It was like a key turning in a broken lock. For the first time in 7 years, I remembered the joyful dancing." The memory and the powerful, innocent laughter of Emily had broken the chemical fog the hospital had used to steal Red's mind. He came back to the mansion, drawn by the sound of the laugh that connected him to the only thing he had ever loved. Jonathan looked at the man, not a killer, but a victim whose life, sanity, and family had been destroyed by a lie he had unknowingly paid for. Jonathan knew what he had to do. He had to stop the police from taking Red away. He needed Red close, not just for his daughter's healing, but because Red was the only living witness to the truth. The next day, Red was officially detained in the guest house. But under Jonathan's supervision, Detective Maria Kessler was angry, but Jonathan convinced her with a desperate plea. Red was the only one who had triggered movement in Emily. The atmosphere in the main house was electric. Emily had twitched her foot again that morning, but she was frustrated. She wanted to communicate with her father, but her vocal cords were still silent, and her hands would only make small, spastic movements. "What is it, sweetie?" Jonathan asked gently, leaning over her wheelchair. "Do you want water? Your stuffed bear?" Emily strained, lifting 2 fingers slightly and twitching them rapidly. Then she blinked her eyes. One long, 2 short, 1 long. 1 long, 2 short, 1 long, Jonathan repeated, totally confused. "Is that a song, Em? Do you want music?" Emily's eyes filled with disappointed tears. She shook her head slightly, then closed her eyes, defeated. Jonathan knew he was failing his daughter again. He needed a translator for his silent, smart child. He brought Red into the room as a last, desperate resort. Red walked slowly, respectfully, and stood by Emily's wheelchair. The guard stood by the door, watching nervously. Red looked at Emily, his gentle eyes focused on her face, not on her motionless body. Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with urgency. She started the rapid, subtle movement again, 2 fingers twitching quickly, followed by the blinking sequence, 1 long, 2 short, 1 long. Red stared at her for a moment, then smiled softly. "You're saying he needs to know, aren't you, little dancer?" Jonathan gasped. "What? How do you know that?" Red knelt down, completely focused on Emily. "It's the language of the forgotten, Mr. Hale. Out on the streets, people who can't speak develop codes with their eyes and fingers. 2 fingers twitching is a sign for stop lying. And the blink, long, short, short, long, is an old Morse code for HKN, Hale knows nothing." Emily immediately gave a tiny wobbly nod, her head moving in agreement. Her eyes shone with gratitude. Red gently reached out and took Emily's small, trembling hand. He looked at her 2 twitching fingers. "You're telling your father to stop trying to guess what you want, and instead to listen to what he needs to do. What is it, little dancer?" Emily slowly, painstakingly, lifted her 3 center fingers, held them still, and then used her thumb to tap them twice, an enormous effort that left her sweating. Red looked at the code, his face softening with emotion. "You're asking him to bring Red." Jonathan was speechless. His daughter's first conscious communication in a year was a plea for the homeless man's society called a murderer. Red looked at Jonathan. "She's not asking me to stay here, sir. She's telling you to bring justice to the man you nearly threw away." Jonathan suddenly understood everything. Red wasn't just a physical therapist. He was Emily's translator and her truth. Emily saw the real victim in Red, and she needed her powerful father to right the terrible wrong. Jonathan Hale, the man who conquered global markets, now had a new mission: to dismantle the corporate lie he had helped build 7 years ago. He needed help. He couldn't trust his own security team, since Mr. Pennyweather and his guards had been suspiciously absent the night Red came in. Jonathan drove straight to the office of Detective Maria Kessler. He told her everything: the master key of the dance, the twitching foot, Emily's silent code, and Red's heartbreaking confession about his sister Martha. Maria listened, her tough exterior cracking slightly with the emotion of the story. "A homeless man's word against Hale Tech's millions, Mr. Hale? That's a mountain." "I have the motive," Jonathan declared. "I didn't investigate the fire because my COO, Gerald Pierce, handled the cleanup. Gerald always hated the homeless and was obsessed with protecting company value. Gerald has been running his own rival company now, but he was the one who controlled all the money back then." Jonathan was convinced Gerald Pierce was the monster. Maria agreed to help, but only in secret. Your company is too powerful, Mr. Hale. If they know you're digging, they'll bury the evidence and blame you for Red's escape. Jonathan began the dangerous investigation. He started by calling Gerald. Gerald, I need the original, raw investigation files on the 2018 Crestview fire, Jonathan said over the phone, trying to sound like a calm CEO. Gerald's voice, usually smooth and charming, turned instantly cold. Those files were properly archived, Jonathan. Let sleeping dogs lie. You should be worried about the maniac you're keeping in your guest house, not 7-year-old liabilities. I want the raw reports, Gerald. The ones before the legal team filtered them. Gerald laughed, a hard, unpleasant sound. You're slipping, Jonathan. Leave the dirty work to the pros. Focus on your silent daughter. The threat was clear. Gerald wasn't just protecting a corporate secret. He was protecting himself. And he was using Emily's condition as a weapon. Jonathan knew he couldn't ask for the files anymore. He had to steal them. That night, Jonathan began preparations for a secret breach. He told his staff he was taking a business trip. He even allowed Mr. Pennyweather to install extra security around the guest house, telling the guard the priority was keeping Red in. But Jonathan's true mission was far away, in a dusty, forgotten storage bunker on the outskirts of Crestview, the place where Hale Tech had buried all its dirty secrets. He was going to expose the corporate monster, even if it cost him everything. Jonathan Hale, armed with the old passwords and security codes only a founder would know, drove a plain rental car to the outskirts of Crestview. He found the dusty, unmarked warehouse that served as the off-site archives for Hale Tech. The building looked deserted, but Jonathan knew the vault was still active. He used his fingerprint and his original access code to bypass the ancient security system. The air inside the archive was cold, dry, and smelled of paper and metallic ozone. Jonathan found the server room, a place filled with flashing lights and humming machines that held the company's entire digital history. He booted up an old disconnected terminal. He searched the digital archives for the 2018 fire. The official, filtered reports were there, pointing the finger cleanly at Raymond Dawson, Red, as a drug-crazed homeless arsonist. But Jonathan wasn't looking for the official story. He was looking for the deleted files, the ones that had been digitally shredded and hidden on a secure server partition. He worked for hours, his corporate mind navigating the complex digital labyrinth. He finally cracked the partition and found the truth. Original investigators report. Raw. The fire did not start from the Hale Tech prototype malfunction. It was started by accelerants, a flammable liquid. It was arson. Financial records deleted. A huge payout of millions was made to an offshore account controlled by Gerald Pierce immediately after the fire. Pierce, as COO, had been covering up years of financial embezzlement. The fire was meant to destroy accounting records, and Ray was the perfect scapegoat. Testimonial suppressed. A neighbor testified that they saw a man in a Hale Tech jacket leaving the building just before the explosion, carrying a large bag. Jonathan slumped back in the chair, a terrible exhaustion washing over him. He had unknowingly funded a cover-up that had cost a life, stolen a man's sanity, and ruined 2 families. Gerald Pierce had not only framed Ray, he had murdered Martha to hide his theft. Jonathan called Detective Maria Kessler immediately. His voice was cold with righteous fury. Maria, I have everything. It was arson. It was Gerald. He set the fire to destroy the records of his embezzlement, and he framed Ray. He killed Martha Dawson. Maria was silent for a moment. Mr. Hale, this is huge. This evidence will bring down the highest levels of your city. I don't care, Jonathan said, gripping his phone. All I care about is setting Raymond Dawson free and watching my daughter walk again. He was no longer a restless ghost. He was a man with a purpose, fueled by the desire to fix the terrible injustice he had helped create. Detective Maria Kessler was a woman of action. Armed with the digital proof from Jonathan, she raced to confirm the final piece of the heartbreaking puzzle. Martha Dawson. She found the old fire victim files. Martha Dawson was indeed Ray's older sister. She was a kind, hard-working woman who had been supporting her struggling younger brother Ray, who was suffering from anxiety after losing his job. Maria also tracked down the original fire investigator. He was now an old man, living quietly in the countryside, still carrying the burden of the lie. Maria cornered him. 7 years ago, you signed a report saying Raymond Dawson was the perpetrator of the Crestview fire. The file was altered. Did Gerald Pierce bribe you? The old investigator, exhausted by his guilt, finally confessed. Pierce paid me a huge sum. He showed me the financial records he claimed Ray stole. He said Ray was a lost cause and the company needed to be saved. He gave me a Hail-Tech jacket as part of the payment and told me to forget the man I saw leaving the building. The original investigator had been bribed, silencing the only person who could have testified about the Hail-Tech jacket. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Emily was growing more agitated. She could sense her father was in danger, even though he was acting calm. She started communicating frantically with Red. Emily, using her code, 2 taps on the head, 3 short blinks. Red, translating, danger is near, check the shadow. Red looked out the window. He saw nothing. But later that night, as Red sat alone in the guest house, he noticed something impossible, a faint, almost invisible light moving near the back of the mansion. He called Jonathan. Mr. Hale, Emily's right. Someone is here, near the perimeter fence, watching the house. Mr. Pennyweather, the head of security, was running the night shift. Jonathan immediately confronted him. Pennyweather, check the south perimeter. Someone is watching. Pennyweather, usually rigid, looked nervous. Sir, the sensors are clear. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Jonathan saw the hesitation in the guard's eyes. Pennyweather knew something. He had been covering for someone. Jonathan played his final card. He showed Pennyweather a copy of Gerald Pierce's arrest warrant, detailing the arson and the embezzlement. Pennyweather, your job is to protect this family. You helped Gerald cover up the break-in that night, didn't you? You shut down the sensors when Red entered because Gerald told you to watch for him. Pennyweather finally broke. His face crumbled. Gerald threatened my pension, sir. He told me Red was a dangerous maniac, but I never hurt anyone, and I never touched the money. Plot twist 2. Pennyweather had been blackmailed by Gerald into ignoring the break-in, hoping Red would simply leave, not realizing Red was an innocent man. Sir, Gerald's been watching the house for 2 days, Pennyweather admitted, his voice a ragged whisper. He thinks you found the proof. I saw him near the fence earlier. He's planning something. The corporate monster was close. Jonathan and Maria had to move fast before Gerald silenced the 2 witnesses, the innocent man and the determined billionaire. The mansion was now a hidden battleground. Jonathan had convinced Mr. Pennyweather to switch sides, providing the family with the security they desperately needed. Pennyweather, seeking redemption, used his insider knowledge to help. The plan was simple. Jonathan would lure Gerald Pierce into the open, while Detective Maria Kessler and her team, hidden in plain sight, would make the arrest. The location, the Hail-Tech penthouse, the ultimate symbol of their shared empire and Gerald's betrayal. Jonathan set the trap. He called Gerald, his voice ice-cold and calm. Gerald, I have the original raw files. I know you burned the accounting records to cover the embezzlement, and you framed Ray to stop him from exposing the faulty tech. Meet me at the penthouse at midnight. You can have the drive for safe passage out of the country. Gerald, greedy and arrogant, immediately agreed. He wanted to destroy the proof and escape with his freedom. Before Jonathan left the mansion, he went to Emily's room to say goodbye. He felt a deep sense of peace. He was doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Emily was waiting. She used her silent code with fierce, intense movements. Emily, code. Rapid finger taps, a twitching arm, and her eyes wide with fear. Red, translating. He is armed. He is dangerous. Don't go alone. Jonathan looked at Red, stunned. How does she know that? Red gently touched Emily's forehead. She's seen the fear in Gerald's shadow, the fear only a truly bad person carries. Jonathan knew he was walking into danger, but he also knew he had Maria and Pennyweather coordinating the takedown. I won't be alone, little dancer, Jonathan promised, kissing her forehead. He left the master key to the off-site archive, the one with the deleted files, with Red. If anything happens to me, give this key to Detective Kessler. The truth must get out. Jonathan put on his Hail-Tech jacket, the symbol of the company's pride and its greatest shame, and headed for the skyscraper. Meanwhile, Maria and her team moved into position. Mr. Pennyweather used his security expertise to disable a few security cameras in the penthouse lobby, creating a blind spot for Maria's team to slip into the high-rise unnoticed. The clock ticked toward midnight. Jonathan rode the private elevator up, his heart pounding, his briefcase containing the decoy drive. He was ready to face the monster he had accidentally created. The Hale-Tech penthouse was a glass and chrome monument to wealth, suspended high above the glittering city lights. Jonathan stood in the center of the room, looking out over the city he had built. At exactly midnight, the private elevator dinged, and Gerald Pierce stepped out. He was dressed flawlessly, but his eyes were darting nervously around the silent space. "Where is the drive, Jonathan?" Gerald demanded, his voice tight. "Let's make this quick." "First, tell me about Martha Dawson," Jonathan said, keeping his tone even. "Tell me you didn't kill her to cover your theft." Gerald smirked, a terrible cold stretch of his face. "Martha Dawson? She was a homeless woman with a drug addict brother. They were liabilities. I was protecting a multi-billion-dollar company from your negligence, Jonathan. I built this empire with you. You were too soft to do what was necessary. You built it on lies and a woman's life," Jonathan stated, slowly raising his voice. "I want to know where you hid the money." Gerald's calmness snapped. "You really think truth matters, you idiot? You're ruining everything. You should have left the crazy dancer alone." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, lethal-looking gun. "The drive, Jonathan," Gerald hissed, aiming the weapon, "or I'll send you to join the rest of your precious failures." Jonathan froze, but he had prepared for this moment. He knew Gerald was meticulous about his appearance. "You're going to use that gun here, Gerald?" Jonathan challenged, trying to buy time. "In your favorite suit? That stain will never come out." Gerald glanced down instinctively at his expensive silk tie. It was the fraction of a second Jonathan needed. He threw the briefcase high and hard toward the glass wall. The briefcase didn't shatter the glass, but the crash of the metal and leather hitting the pane was enough of a distraction. Before Gerald could re-aim, the service elevator doors burst open. "Police! Drop the weapon, Gerald!" Detective Maria Kessler's voice was sharp and commanding. Maria and her team stormed the room, their weapons drawn. Gerald was stunned. He hadn't expected the police to be inside the secure building. He attempted to raise the gun, but Maria moved with a speed Jonathan hadn't expected. She tackled Gerald, sending the small gun sliding across the marble floor. Gerald Pierce, the untouchable corporate monster, was finally subdued, handcuffed, and read his rights, his elegant suit now rumpled and ruined. Jonathan stood there, breathing deeply, the weight of 7 years of guilt finally lifting from his shoulders. He was safe. The truth was out. Within 48 hours, the glittering city of Crestview was shocked. The news reports screamed headlines of corporate crime, murder, and a homeless man's innocence. Gerald Pierce was charged with arson, murder, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The mountain of evidence Jonathan had retrieved from the archive, combined with the original investigator's testimony, made the case airtight. Raymond Dawson, the man known as Red, was officially and publicly declared wrongfully institutionalized and innocent. The state issued a full apology for the 7 years of freedom and sanity stolen from him. Jonathan Hale stood by Red's side as the paperwork was signed. Red was weak, but his eyes were finally clear. "You saved me, Mr. Hale," Red said, his voice stronger now. "You saved me first, Ray," Jonathan replied, using his real name. "You saved my daughter, and you saved my conscience." The biggest miracle was still happening back at the mansion. Mrs. Gina, Emily's physical therapist, was ecstatic. She explained the medical impossibility. The drugs they gave Ray stole his memory, but they didn't steal his love. Emily's paralysis was partly physical, but largely emotional. Her brain was too traumatized to send signals, Mrs. Gina explained. Red's presence, the sound of his humming, the laughter, it provided the massive, joyful emotional shock necessary for her brain to begin reconnecting the pathways. The emotional connection triggered the physical healing. The dancing was the cure. Jonathan offered Red a home, a job, and the promise of a life rebuilt. Red didn't ask for money or revenge. He only asked to see Emily. The trial was ongoing, but the truth was out. Jonathan had lost a huge part of his fortune in the scandal, but he had gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that he had fought for justice and reclaimed his daughter's life. The next morning, the sun streamed through Emily's window. She was sitting in her wheelchair, looking out at the perfect green lawn. The door opened, and Red walked in, carrying a simple wooden flute. He sat beside her. The room was silent, filled only with the warm light of the morning sun. Raymond Dawson, Red, took a deep breath and began to play the flute, a soft, simple tune that sounded like the sea in sunlight. He then rose and began to dance again. It wasn't the clumsy, slow dance from the night he broke in. It was a fluid, silly, joyful dance, the one he used to share with his sister Martha, who was now finally at rest. He spun and twirled, creating a bubble of pure, unadulterated joy. Emily watched, her face radiant. Her foot started to twitch, moving in time with the music. Then her ankle wiggled. Then her leg, with effort, lifted a few inches off the floor. Mrs. Gina, standing by the door with Jonathan, gasped silently, covering her mouth. Emily pushed her hands forward, gripping the wheels of her chair, trying desperately to move. Her silent code was screaming, "I must join him!" Red stopped dancing and walked slowly toward her, his hand outstretched. Emily strained, gathering every ounce of strength and courage she had. She pushed down on the chair's arms and slowly, wobbly, forced herself to stand on 2 feet. Her legs were shaking violently. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Then, with a burst of determination that would have made her father proud, she took one uncertain, miraculous step toward the dancing man, her first step in a year. Jonathan Hale broke down, tears streaming down his face. He rushed forward to catch her, but Red gently waved him back. Red held his hand out, keeping the focus only on Emily. Emily took another step, then a third, until she tumbled forward, right into Raymond Dawson's waiting open arms. The homeless man society had thrown away. The man who had lost everything to the glittering lies of corporate greed was the hero who healed the billionaire's family. Jonathan realized that the true criminals were never the people sleeping under the bridges. They were the ones who hid their cold hearts in polished boardrooms. The beautiful house was finally healed, not by wealth or technology, but by the love and laughter of a man who only wanted to dance. And Emily, the silent dancer, was finally free, ready to take on the world, one joyful step at a time.